Welcome back on this Friday. Glad that you are joining us for These Things Are Written. We are wrapping up Isaiah chapter 2. The first 5 verses pointed forward to the hope that we would see in Jesus Christ. While it doesn't mention him by name, it talks about that day that would come when peace would be brought. The peace that comes with Christ in his first coming, but also when he comes again. As we read this, you will notice that the tone has changed to more of a tone of rebuke against God's chosen people, the house of Jacob. We're going to read this section by section, stopping every now and then and talking about what's happening in those verses. We begin with verse 6. For you have rejected your people, the house of Jacob, because they are full of things from the east and of fortune tellers like the Philistines, and they strike hands with the children of foreigners. As we look at this part, we see the people of God have been rejected by the Lord. They've been rejected because it says they are full of things from the east, the gods of the east, the traditions of the east, the worship of the people from the east, not of what God would desire them to have. And it says that they strike hands with children of foreigners. They trust in foreign people, in foreign governments to bring them peace and security. Verse 7, the land is filled with silver and gold, and there is no end to their treasure. Their land is filled with horses, and there is no end to their chariots. Their land is filled with idols. They bow down to the work of their hands, to what their own fingers have made. These 2 verses show the trust that they have. And as you notice, the repetition shows that they are connected together. They trust in their riches. They trust in their armies. They trust in their idols, their false gods. All of those riches, armies, idols are all false gods. Verse 9 continues, so man is humbled, and each one is brought low. Do not forgive them. Enter into the rock and hide in the dust from before the terror of the Lord and from the splendor of his majesty. The haughty looks of man shall be brought low, and the lofty pride of men shall be humbled, and the Lord alone will be exalted on that day. So as we look at these verses, verse 9 is kind of that hinge verse, talking about the pride of the people previously, and now verse 9, so man is humbled, each one is brought low. Those who trusted in riches, in armies, in their false gods made by human hands have been humbled and brought low. This would be done through the Assyrians as they came to destroy Judah and lay siege to Jerusalem. It would also be done through the Babylonians as well. Then it talks about enter into the rock and hide in the dust from before the terror of the Lord and from the splendor of his majesty. In the presence of God, as we saw in Exodus, as we will see in chapter 6 of Isaiah, people who are in the presence of the Lord fall to the ground. They hide from God's presence because of our sinfulness. They are hiding from the terror of the Lord, from the struggles and the pains that are brought upon them by God. The haughty looks of man shall be brought low. Pride shall be humbled, and the Lord alone exalted in that day. Man was lifting himself up instead of the Lord. As we look at the next section, beginning in verse 12, in some ways, this is kind of a parallel with the section before it as well, as you'll see this as we read a little bit. For the Lord of hosts has a day against all that is proud and lofty, against all that is lifted up, and it shall be brought low, against all the cedars of Lebanon, lofty and lifted up, and against all the oaks of Bashan, against all the lofty mountains, and against all the uplifted hills, against every tower, and against every fortified wall, against the ships of Tarshish, and against all the beautiful craft. So as we look at this, the Lord is talking about how the Lord is going to humble those who are proud, tear down the proud, First of all, bringing them low by the destruction of maybe their natural resources that they have, whether it's the cedar of Lebanon, the oaks of Bashan, the mountains, uplifted hills, and then it moves into the man-made things, every high tower, every fortified wall. In other words, those military upcroppings and bringing cities and things that have been built to protect them will be humbled and brought low. He says, against all the ships of Tarshish and all the beautiful craft, they represent the trade and the financial power that those cities had. They will be humbled as well. Verse 17 is very similar to verse 11 as you look at it. And the haughtiness of man shall be humbled, the lofty pride of men shall be brought low, and the Lord alone will be exalted in that day. Again, showing that comparison, that connection to the first section we saw. And the idols shall utterly pass away, and people shall enter the caves of the rocks and the holes of the ground, from before the terror of the Lord and from the splendor of his majesty when he rises to terrify the earth. Again, we look at verse 13, see very similar words to verse 10. Saying it in another way, that repetition shows the importance of what is being said, that God will humble the proud. In that day, mankind will cast away their idols of silver and their idols of gold, which they made for themselves to worship, to the moles and to the bats, to enter the caves of the rocks and the clefts of the cliffs, from before the terror of the Lord and from the splendor of his majesty when he rises to terrify the earth. Again, showing how he will humble those who are proud. Those who trusted in those false idols. As they are fleeing, they throw those away to trust in, to hide themselves from the Lord. They are no longer important. They can no longer save them or protect them. Stop regarding man, in whose nostril is breath. For what account is he? As we look at this last verse, verse 22, in some ways it summarizes it. And it summarizes it by reminding us that we are not as great as we think we are. We think that we are the next thing to God. But remember how Jesus in Philippians, how Paul talks about in Philippians 2, how Jesus humbled himself, made himself nothing, taking the form of a man. Next to God, man is nothing. We are not as great as we think we are. Even with all the wonderful technology and progress and great things we are able to do, it is nothing compared to what God can do. So my brothers and sisters in Christ, humble yourself before the Lord. Come to him in humility and not in pride in what you have done, but in humility, recognizing and knowing what he has done for you. God bless you this weekend, and come back on Monday. We'll be beginning Isaiah chapter 3. Hope to see you then. God bless.